Now, to survive the coming year, entrepreneurs should identify new opportunities amid the pandemic instead of looking to government for aid, since nearly half had shut their doors during the lockdown and more than 90% rejected for COVID-19 funding, relief funding. That's the stark and blunt top line from the South African Small, Medium and Micro Enterprises COVID-19 Impact Report by an organization called FinFind that has found 42, let's call it 43% of businesses had to close during the lockdown. With me now on Wednesday lunchtime, Chief Executive Officer, FinFind, Darlene Menzies. Good afternoon to you and welcome. Those numbers don't make for pretty reading, do they? To all intent and purposes, activity has been cut in half. Do you have some numbers that you can spin around that bloodbath? Just how bad was it?
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks. The numbers are devastating for the country when you think that really the engine room of South Africa are small businesses, and that's where many of the jobs are. So, some of the numbers, when you have a look at those businesses that closed their doors, we had between even those that closed and those that remained open, 60% of permanent job losses, 76% of part-time job losses in the first 5 months of COVID, and 53% less casual labour has been taken on by SMMEs over that same period. And even consultants took a knock where small businesses were looking to employ or to contract 41% less contractors over the first 5 month end period. So, yes, not a pretty picture at all, I'm afraid.
You make the point that to survive the coming year, entrepreneurs need to identify new opportunities instead of looking for government or looking to government for aid. All well and good, but try and tell that to an exhausted and demoralized entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's not an easy story, but sometimes, it's better to look at where the opportunity is actually going to happen than to keep going after something that's not there. And, the money that was made available, the 200 billion, that wasn't in fact, it was more a guarantee that was put up by government through the banks. Unfortunately, that money was quite expensive. Not a lot of banks took that up. I think there's been less than a 5% take-up. And, about more than 50% of businesses that applied, government were the biggest lender that they went to. As you said, 99.9% of those that closed that applied didn't get funding, and 81% were rejected of those businesses that remained open. And a lot of that had to do with, the ability or inability to process volume. Also had to do with businesses that had previous debt prior to lockdown and just didn't have the cash reserves to see themselves through the period of actually getting through the application process. But the reality too is 60% of them actually didn't even get a response. So it's not easy to go out there and get funding. So probably better to go after revenue, lower your overheads, go after revenue, and try and get out of the difficulty that you're in at the moment. I myself over the years have liquidated 3 times and come back. So speaking from experience.
There is one point that you raise which is critical, and it's a life lesson here for any entrepreneur. Almost 65% of businesses only had cash reserves that would last between 1 and 3 months. In other words, businesses operating on a knife edge all the time.
I think this is a reality that government and big business in terms of enterprise development programs and even consumers out there that are constantly asked to support small business sector don't actually realize. Most are running, really tight as far as cash flow is concerned. A lot of money often tied up in invoices waiting to be paid. And when you get a situation like the pandemic and lockdown that hit us sort of out of the blue, 30% of them could only make the next month's expenses. What starts to happen is possibly they don't pay their PAYE and their VAT because they're trying to keep paying their staff. Then they go to apply for finance and they won't be given funding because they don't have a tax clearance certificate. So there are knock-on effects. The owner decides not to pay himself or herself and tries to keep the business going, isn't able to pay their own personal expenses, and then starts getting into trouble on their own consumer credit score, and then again can't raise business credit. So all of these things have a knock-on effect. So the big lesson is that much more cash reserves. You need at least 6 months runway in the bank or available so that you're able to really survive periods like this. But easier said than done, as you said, Jeremy.
Darlene Menzies from FinFind, thank you very much indeed. Now,